Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to
the flag
of the United States of America,
and
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, roll call, please.
Jim Batson,
Here.
Don Carmichael,
Here.
Pat Grudy,
Here.
Lisa Hessel,
Here.
Kevin Huber,
Here.
Aaron Lundstedt,
Here.
Casey Rooney.
Here.
Okay, so we know that all board members are present tonight. Our agenda will open it up for public comment. I understand we had a number of comments this evening. And then we will have a discussion on the potential addition of an all-day in-person student attendance option to the current attendance options after spring break. All right, let's open it up for public comment then.
Okay, the first letter I have is from Carrie Van Brunt. Members of the board, with one child engaged in hybrid learning at LHS, I am ambivalent about the possible addition of the full day in-person option. Of course, we all want our children back in school full time, and there is evidence to suggest that this can be done safely. While infection rates are down, we are not out of the woods yet, and it is premature to start lifting restrictions if we hope to see the downward trend continue. The more contagious variants of the virus are poised to be the dominant strains this spring. Most concerning is the variant emerging in California that appears to be not only more contagious, but more deadly. Regions of the country are lifting mitigations and putting this progress at risk. Widespread vaccinations are on the horizon, but their efficacy against the variants are unknown. If full-time in-person becomes a reality, I ask that you consider the timing of this option. Many people in the community have traveled freely, and we must assume that they will continue to do so for spring break and flock to the warm regions without public health mandates such as masks and distancing. Their return to the community puts us all at risk. 2 weeks of virtual learning after spring break for all students before returning to the classroom would be prudent and put many minds at ease. Regards, Carrie Van Brunt. The second message is from Jen Carney. Dear board members, I ask that you consider the following as you discuss the opportunity for full in-person learning this semester. My father-in-law is an 80-year-old retired fire chief waiting for his turn for the COVID vaccine. If you asked him, he'd tell you he is reluctantly willing to wait if it means teachers get vaccinated so the kids can get back in school. I'm sure I'm not the only one with an older friend or family member eagerly waiting their turn. And I'm certainly not the only parent of an LHS senior longing to give them even just a few weeks of in-person learning before they graduate from the school they love. Illinois puts educators at the top of the list for one purpose: to return students to in-person instruction. The very data that was cited as reason to postpone hybrid in the fall now clearly supports an in-person option. We can no longer point to Carmel and Oak Grove as outliers. High schools as close as Northfield, Lake Zurich, and Barrington are offering students the options for in-person learning 5 days a week. Every district has its challenges, and there will always be concerns related to distancing and variants and so on. We owe it to our kids to question convention, take calculated risks, think creatively, use evidence and reason to find solutions. If these approaches sound familiar, it's because they are cornerstones of our daring mission, the same mission we ask our students to live by, and whose logo features a quote from Maya Angelou that reads, "Success is loving life and daring to live it." Hybrid was a positive first step, but it falls short of expectations for a district that has consistently set the bar among its peers. The easy thing to do is to stay the course and ride out the year. The right thing to do is to give our kids the chance to have full in-person learning this semester, even if only for a few weeks. Thank you. The next message is from Julie Brown. Please vote yes to offer a full day option after spring break to those that choose to attend. Our kids need to be back in front of their teachers. Thank you. And the next message is from Vicki Mitchell. Good job with hybrid so far. My son is really enjoying it. And thank you for managing D128 with common sense and integrity thus far during this once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. I very much appreciate the COVID testing that is being done currently. However, I feel strongly that the testing program should be strengthened and expanded. Please consider updating the COVID testing spreadsheet to at least 2 times per week, increasing the number of tests given to reduce lines and allow greater participation, and making testing mandatory for in-person schooling. Students who decline to test and are not exempt from testing are welcome to stay remote. As far as the all-day option, I would only support that option for this academic year if social distancing of 6 feet or more can be maintained. My son has 16 people in one class currently, which is too many in my opinion. He has also informed me that 6 feet is already not practical in some places like hallways and doorways. One suggestion is to allow the seniors only an all-day in-person option if you are able to spread them out to maintain social distancing. Under that scenario, you could add picnic tables outside under a large canopy for lunch periods. Of course, lunch would be a grab and go only. On a separate note, please continue to enhance ventilation in classrooms, which includes air purifiers, student desk cleaning, strategically opened windows, and retrofitting equipment as needed. Classrooms which have poor ventilation or no open windows should only be used in a minimal way, if at all. Thank you. The next message is from Elaine Vong and Greg Salton. Superintendent Lee and Board of Education. We understand that the Board of Education is considering a full day in-person option after spring break. We urge you to consider the following. 1, significant COVID-19 spikes in cases have occurred after every major holiday in the last year: Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. If D128 institutes a full day of in-person instruction, please have it be delayed until April 12th. This would allow people to return from traveling, though still ill-advised at this time in a pandemic, and see whether they develop symptoms in the ensuing 14 days per Illinois Public Health Department guidance. 2, while Lake County continues to roll out the vaccine and testing has been widespread availability, recent developments with the variants detected in the US and Illinois create an uncertain, evolving situation. This is not to say that in-person instruction cannot resume for those who select that option, but that we have to be cognizant of how we use testing. There was an FDA bulletin issued January 8th, 2021 regarding the variants and PCR/rapid PCR testing, warning that 1 rapid PCR instrument and 2 PCR reagents widely used by CLIA high complexity testing labs had issues with detection of variants. Furthermore, the FDA revised its guidelines for developing COVID-19 diagnostic tests on February 22nd, 2021, stating that the FDA now expects all companies seeking EUA to perform testing against all known variants at the time of submission. It should be pointed out that currently our knowledge of variants is lacking in the US, since we only recently started initiatives to perform whole genome sequencing to understand the prevalence of variants in the US. Currently, the US does whole genome sequencing on 0.36% of positive cases. State levels range from 0.02% to 2.6%. Data from 2/9/2021, and she provides a web link for further information. The district should not let up testing of students and staff attending in-person instruction and should maintain flexibility to pivot to other testing. See point 3 below. And I'm sorry if you're hearing my dog bark. My turn tonight. Number 3, the school district should be investigating other options for testing besides lateral flow assays. Abbott was seeking an amended EUA for an asymptomatic indication of their BinaxNOW antigen testing. Even with that indication, the ability of lateral flow antigen assays to detect positive cases with lower prevalence of disease is not well established. D128 should investigate using PCR testing as a pool for surveillance. The size of the pools should be reflective of the positivity rates seen at LHS or VHHS over the preceding week and should be selected so the pool size multiplied by the prevalence rate is less than 1.0. Otherwise, statistically, a pool would be positive every time it tested. As a consultant in the medical device and pharmaceutical industries, I've worked in the last year on several COVID-19 diagnostic projects, including launching new COVID-19 test instruments and with a company conducting high throughput testing in CLIA high complexity laboratory. If you need information on companies able to assist with PCR pooled testing, I would be happy to share companies I've found through my work. Thank you. And I do have one letter that came in slightly past the deadline, so I don't know if you want me to.
Yeah, we can read it. Go ahead and read it. Yeah.
Okay. This letter is from Diana Gratz. Good evening. During the many board meetings I have watched during the pandemic, there is often discussion about the stakeholders, the teachers, students, community. I would like to take this opportunity to remind the board and inform the community that district support staff has been back in the school buildings since August of 2020, and I do not think buildings and grounds staff ever left. Pause to think about that for a minute. What did your life look like in August of 2020? Were you going to work into your office to work? Are you going into your office to work currently? While support staff and B&G staff are evidently not considered stakeholders, they are devoted employees that have been physically in the building, ensuring that the school functions as it should. I would encourage the board to try and run the school without the support staff and B&G staff that are often overlooked, not considered stakeholders, and have been and will continue to be significantly impacted by board decisions. When you consider bringing back students for a full day, what impact does increasing the density in the building have on support staff and B&G, not just from a safety standpoint, which should be a consideration, but from a workload standpoint? The support staff and B&G staff have been and continue to be nimble, delving into complexity and ambiguity every workday during these challenging times. I would ask the board to be aware, seek to understand the varied experiences and realities of others during their decision-making process. Thank you for your time. And that is all.
Okay. All right. So with that, we'll open up the discussion. I'll turn it over to Dr. Lee.
Okay. Good evening. Obviously to the board and everybody on the district leadership team, and right now the 120 people that are participating in the meeting. We appreciate that. So as Pat indicated from the agenda item, we are here tonight to discuss the possible addition of an all-day in-person student attendance option to existing options after spring break. So we want to do several things this evening, kind of got a working agenda that we want to move through, and that will help us facilitate discussion and questions. But we're going to ask Pat to review the metrics that are reviewed at the board meeting, so we have a good understanding of that. I'll ask Brian to do a quick overview of the CDC Idph Guidelines again. Then we want to take a little time and talk about rationale for consideration of an additional option, including metrics, external and internal within the school district, precautions and protocols, our BinaxNOW testing, educator vaccinations and the status, social distancing and the 50-person space capacity against IDPH LCHD guidelines and liability after an additional conversation with school council on that. We want to talk about retention of current options, which we think is very important. And then finally, addition of all-day in-person student attendance to existing options, what a schedule would look like, a start date for that, lunch, transportation, and other considerations that may go with that. So that's essentially what we'd like to do tonight, and answer questions along the way, and certainly at the end, but have a dialogue with the board. So depending where we're at when we conclude tonight, there are several action steps that we would want to move forward with before coming back to the board with a proposal and a recommendation perhaps next week. So we could move this forward. So I think that's what the evening looks like, and we certainly want to make this work for the board as well. So just to start tonight, and again, as I said at the board meeting last week, we want to understand the metrics. We want to understand CDC Idph guidelines in the context of our decision making. It doesn't mean that we won't make decisions. Doesn't mean that we can't make decisions. It means that we need to all understand that and then the implications of that. So Pat, if Brian can pull the metrics up, if you want to walk us through, because we may have a whole different audience here tonight than we had at the board meeting last Monday.
Yeah, and then I just want to clarify, just because I know this came up in the comments, and I know an email we got. So we are not planning a formal vote this evening,
Correct.
right? We're just going to have a discussion and review our options here.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we would conceivably vote on it as early as the next meeting next week, though, correct?
Yes, and we'll talk about that at the
little
end, depending on, what's the pleasure of the board. Do we want to have a special meeting, between the committee meetings, after the committee meetings, before the committee meetings, or do you want to have another special meeting just to handle this issue and vote on it? So.
Okay. All right, so we did review that slide. This one you can get rid of, actually. Go to the next one. Okay, these were data as of last week that we reviewed at the board meeting. And good news, both Libertyville and Vernon Hills, over the last several weeks, the rolling average COVID positivity rate has come way down. So we're Vernon Hills, as of last week, was running 2.17%. That's a 7-day rolling average. Actually, as of today, they're up slightly to 2.43%. But regardless, a lot of progress has been made over the last several weeks. The next number that's important is this number of new cases, and it's a 7-day cumulative number of cases per 100,000 population. This number has actually gotten a lot better over the last several weeks, but in the last week, it's gone from 71 in Vernon Hills to about 140. All right, so that just means that we've kind of plateaued in terms of our improvement here. We're seeing a slight uptick. And to put that in perspective, that means we're really fluctuating according to the new CDC guidelines, which have been revised very recently within Vernon Hills, and it's also true in Libertyville. We are running between the substantial transmission and high transmission part of their metrics. All right. So we haven't yet moved down into the moderate transition, which is where I had forecasted we would be moving when I saw the 71. But we backslid here just slightly in the last week. Okay. But, in all honesty, that means the difference between, instead of about 2.5 to 3 cases per week, we're seeing about 4 cases per week across both towns. All right. Next slide. Next slide. This just kind of shows you the trend. And again, those positivity rates have come down quite a bit. The top box was what I had shown a month ago at the board meeting. The bottom box is what I showed last week. So you can see a month ago, we were running at almost 7%, somewhere between 6 and 7%. And this month, we actually have brought that down between 2 and 3%, and we're still running within that range. So really an improvement almost by a factor of 2, and an even bigger improvement, frankly, in the number of new cases per 100,000. All right. So again, slight uptick this week, but significant improvement from late December, early January. Next slide. Libertyville, really the same story holds true. last week I reported the 7-day positivity rate at 1.53% and about 64 cases per 100,000 population. So again, we were nearing that moderate transmission range, which has an upper limit of 49. And if you looked at the trending of the number of new cases per day, it really looked like that was going to trend down into that. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. It has upticked a little bit. Next slide. Again, Libertyville right now is running at 2.16, and the case rate actually has doubled since that last number. It's now at about 122. Again, a month ago, much like Vernon Hills, we were running between 5 and 6% on the positivity rate, and now we seem to be holding it 2 plus or minus a little bit. So again, a significant improvement, and the case rate not down quite as much at 142.1 on the 24th of January, now at 122.1, but still much better than late December, early January numbers. All right, so overall in the two communities, a significant amount of improvement. Again, I want to emphasize that's great news. But please heed the latest CDC guidance, which is to be vigilant and help us to continue that downward trend so we don't see an uptick here over the next weeks and months.
Hey,
Next
Pat,
slide. Yeah.
Can you just remind us, for those of the community members who weren't able to join us at our last board meeting, where you aggregate this information from?
Sure. Good question, Lisa. Sure. So all of this data comes from a website that is run by Northwestern University. All right. So unlike in months past, I had actually gotten the data from the Daily Herald website and then manually calculate out of the numbers. This data is coming directly from the website that is published daily by Northwestern University. And it actually represents the two major zip codes of the district. So 60061 is Vernon Hills, 60048 is Libertyville. It's not comprehensive, including all the different zip codes that we have, but this is how we've historically been tracking it.
And can you just, again, as a reminder, why we're not using Lake County Health Department data?
Well, so first of all, the Lake County Health Department testing data, if you look at their schools dashboard, hasn't been updated, I don't think, since the November timeframe. Okay, right. So that's the main reason we pivoted from looking at the Lake County Health data. I mean, I still have some of that in this package, I think. But also, I think we're trying to look more specifically at our community. I do have Lake County Health data for our two communities coming up here, but it's basically the same story as what we're seeing in this dashboard. But they haven't updated test positivity in a long time.
Right. Thanks for clarifying.
Yep, thanks. Okay, next slide. These, just to clarify, the red, yellow, green here are the metrics thresholds based on the IDPH guidance. All right, so this really just shows that both Libertyville and Vernon Hills are both running and have been through the month of February running in the green metrics range for testing positivity rate. All right, so again, that's good news. I do believe that in part reflects some of the testing that we've been doing in our general population, which is obviously largely asymptomatic, and that in and of itself, I think, will help drive those numbers down. But nevertheless, according to the thresholds established by IDPH, our positivity rate looks very, very good. Next slide. Likewise, the hospitalization data, no real trends here to report, and I think by all accounts, in our area, this is Region 9 data. This is not specific to Vernon Hills or Libertyville. This is only reported for region by region. So it includes all the zip codes that would be part of Region 9, including those in Lake County and McHenry. But right now, both the ICU and hospital bed capacity looks quite good in the region. Next slide. Okay, this is the data from the Lake County website. So really, at the end of the day, it's a slightly different number in terms of the metric and the way it's calculated, but it basically shows how far we've come since December and early January, where we saw that tremendous increase in the incidence rate. We've just made a lot of progress. All right, so we're really back into the range where we were sort of in the late fall area in September. Next slide. That was Libertyville. The next slide's Vernon Hills. It shows basically the same picture. And the next slide. Again, these are just the new metrics from CDC. So we'll focus on the testing side, which is the lower row there. Obviously there we're in what would be considered the low transmission rates, since our testing positivity rates are below 5%. However, our total new case rate, so again, that's the cumulative number of cases in 7 days per 100,000 of population, continues to be really fluctuating between the substantial and the high metrics regions. We're certainly hoping to see that shift in the coming weeks into the moderate transmission range. Again, which will only happen if we continue to practice good mitigation, not only in the schools, but throughout the community. Okay, so that's where we are with metrics.
Thanks, Pat. Brian, you want to do a overview of the CDC Idph guidance?
Yeah, so just, review of some of the stuff that we did. We talked about at the last meeting, and, things that are in place in both of our schools that we've had since the beginning. Schools have to have universal and correct use of appropriate personal protection equipment, including face masks. According to IDPH, no more than 50 individuals from gathering in one space. Physical distancing of 6 feet should be observed as much as possible. Self-symptom screenings, temperature checks before entering the buildings for all students and staff. School-wide cleaning and disinfection. Contact tracing in place, and that's done by our school nurses in conjunction working with all of our families in the Lake County Health Department. Surveillance. So some of the other things that we also, have that help us in our mitigation is our testing that we have available. And, we can also talk about, and I know it was mentioned about vaccinations available to school staff members. So. Okay.
It's just basically the review of what we've talked about many times. And Monday night at the board meeting, Bryant reviewed for us the updated CDC guidance, which is inclusive in the comments he just made. So, what would be a rationale at this point for consideration of adding an all-day in-person option to the 2 options that we're already doing, a hybrid half-day and remote? There is a confluence or maybe a meeting of several factors that open the door for our board's consideration and other boards in the area of that work with high schools of looking at adding this option to the current tool bag. And some of those things are we've just heard. One, the metrics in our external local communities, so Libertyville and Vernon Hills, are dramatically better than they were when they peaked in November, and almost historically low, although Pat, you can comment on that, I think, but just looking at the data charts. Our internal school communities, so within Libertyville High School and Vernon Hills High School, we know from testing about if you put our athletes in there, and that number will continue to go up because there are more students involved in spring athletics, and they have to test. So we're probably at 73 or 74% of our students. And I think we're at 90 plus the number of staff members that are testing weekly. And our testing numbers are good. Today, the power of the testing, today, we had an individual that's connected to one of the athletic programs, and then we had another student or another individual, that person who tested positive in our Buy Next Now testing. And what that's allowed is, our nurses to work with Lake County Health Department and do appropriate contact tracing. So both of those cases for those individuals, might not have been discovered if we weren't doing weekly testing. So the one thing about testing, and Pat, you can weigh in here, but I think you're kind of our testing expert. But one of the things about testing is that the more people we test, the better handle we get on better handle we get on our local school community. And so our numbers have been good. I think I did my 6th or 7th test last Friday. I do Friday testing. That's my scheduled time. Testing is very easy. It's very brief and it's very non-invasive in order to do that. So that's a good tool for us to have in the toolbox. But the numbers it is yielding would be favorable. And as Pat indicated, as our testing numbers are reported to the state, it's probably helped bring the overall numbers in the communities down. The other thing that we talked about a little bit are precautions and protocol. So just to review, the leadership teams working with buildings and grounds that Diana Gratz commented on earlier, have done a terrific job in getting our buildings ready for kids to come back to school on January 19th. So if you've been in either of the buildings, you will see that that's very obvious. So, but again, just to review, part of that protocol is, mass temperature scanning when the students come in at the beginning, a requirement for students to follow and staff to follow PPE requirements while they're in the building, creation of one-way hallways, and pathways for students and staff to move throughout the building as part of our building protocols. And then I just spent a couple of minutes on our Buy Next Now testing. And then the other big development over the last several weeks are Educator vaccinations in Lake County. We have a very unique partnership between the Lake County Health Department and the Lake County Superintendents Association here. And, through the end of last week, all the invitations were sent out to any educators or school personnel in the county who had not before received an invitation to be vaccinated. So this week, the rest of the staff who is up for their first round of vaccination should be completed. And in addition, the folks that were vaccinated 4 weeks ago are also starting to receive their invitations to be getting their second vaccines this week. So following the math on that, sometime right after spring break, if the vaccination pipeline continues in Lake County the way it has, then we should have all of the school personnel in Lake County who wanted to be vaccinated, vaccinated. The other piece of this, and what I mentioned at the board meeting on Monday, is that we and other school districts, particularly at the high school level, would have to wrestle with is the 6-foot social distancing and the 50-person space capacity limit. So a couple of things. Schools like us that are looking at this are looking at the 6-foot distancing more literally or broadly as IDPH is. So Bryant mentioned before, and this is right off the IDPH website, maintain a distance of at least 6 feet from other adults and from students when feasible. We followed up with a question with Lake County Health Department a couple of weeks ago in our weekly meeting. And the question was something like this. So as schools, have some other dynamics like we do. In other words, there's some, positive things. They're testing. They've got all our protocols in place. They do those types of things. 6-foot distancing is the barrier for schools really looking at that. So as some schools consider that, and if they choose to open, what are the ramifications from either the governor's office or from IDPH? And the response was one that I think we know, but was along the lines of, the governor and IDPH, are likely to leave that decision making up to local school districts. So the rule of thumb that people are starting to talk about is 6 foot or the best you can, keeping 6 foot as your target and doing the best job you can. The reality of the situation in high schools, and I could extend this to junior high schools and middle schools, which are set up much like high schools with students moving around the building in individual classes, is this. If there's not flex on that 6-foot guideline, then the question becomes, when are we ever going to open school again, right? Is it now? Is it the fall? Is it a year from now? Is it a year and a half or 2 years from now? Because that's the operative question. And to tie a couple of things together, I had a follow-up conversation with our Chief Counsel, Lynn Himes, we used to call him Scariano, but Himes and Petrarca now, and Fester. And on this question, and the question we were wrestling with at the beginning of the year is, it's still true that school districts have no liability insurance. It's still true that you can't buy it in the private market. It is still true that as a government agency, there's a higher threshold for somebody to meet to be successful in a liability case. However, prior to this, the real rule of thumb was only if you follow the guidance of your relevant government agency. For us, that would be Governor, IDPH, ISDE, of course. And they would follow the guidance of the CDC. So the difference in where we've moved now is that when we had this discussion in July and August and September, as part of the equation, and by the way, and Pat, you've said this before, the lack of liability insurance never was a major part of any discussion that we had, nor was it a major part of any decision making that we made. I want to make that clear again. But what's tilted here is that because we are doing so many other mitigations, okay, because we've got good mitigations and PPE in place, because we're testing, because our staff's being vaccinated, because we're working closely with the health department, the legal opinion on this has shifted to, yes, we would be able to defend you because you're doing many other things that we did not have in place before when we were doing decision making. So to tie this back to possibly adding an option that would allow us to bring students back, some students back all day in person, is that in order to do that, we would have to do 6-foot social distancing, or the best we can, using the 6-foot social distancing as a target in order to be able to do that. And that is the same conversation other superintendents and boards are having, in roughly the same time frame that we're having our discussions, as we look at not only what we're going to do now, but possibly how that will impact decision making, moving into the fall. So we have to get comfortable with that concept if we're going to look at moving forward with providing an option for students in the future. Now, in the 50-foot capacity, and I've said this before, it's a bit frustrating. And it's a bit frustrating because during the school day, for us, 3:25 or earlier, we can only have 50 people in a space. It doesn't matter how big the space is. So if we wanted to put 51 people in a gym, social distance them 25 feet apart, we would be in violation of the 50-foot guideline. Okay. So that's been a bit of frustration to people. The other thing that people need to be cognizant of on the 50-foot space capacity is that prior to 3:25, we can only have 50 people in a gym. At 3:25 plus 1 second, because we've now moved to after school, we can put a couple of teams in the gym, officials, scorekeepers, trainers, and then we can put up to 50 fans in a high school gymnasium. So now you can do up to 100 people, let's say, in a gym. And so what we're told through several conduits, and I've verified this through my conduits as well, is that one of the committees that works on guidance and guidelines for IDPH has made a recommendation, IDPH, to lift the 50-person space capacity limit. Now, that was a week and a half ago. We haven't seen that come to fruition. We haven't seen IDPH act on that. But it would seem to make sense that that would happen, would need to happen because of the obvious difference between 3:26 in the afternoon and 3:25 in the afternoon. So where that 50-person space capacity comes in to play for us will be as we navigate logistics for lunch, depending on how many students would elect the all-day option. So some of those things coming together really provide the impetus for us to take the next step in having the discussion that we're having tonight, and having us talk about a concept that we've talked about leadership team and we can possibly move forward with moving forward. I would say the other thing that we feel very strongly about is that we have provided parents options. So we have a percentage of our population across the district that's in remote, about 50%. We have about 50% of our parents who have chosen a half-day hybrid. And based on the concept that we're going to talk with you about tonight, parents would retain those options. So we don't think midstream, and as close to the end of the year that we are, that it would make any sense to take choice away from somebody that wanted remote, which we're, by the way, we're required to offer from the state, or the half-day hybrid, because we may well have a number of parents who are comfortable with their kids being here a half a day in more limited numbers, but not whole day with larger numbers of students. So we'd want to retain those two options as part of what we would talk about conceptually. So the addition of an all-person in-person student attendance day for us to existing options, we have a block schedule that has worked well for us so far. So Bryant, if you want to put this schedule up, this is the schedule that we use, and this would build on our existing schedule. So Bryant, if I asked you the question and said, okay, students in currently half day, and if we offered them a whole day option, how would their day look different?
So right now, if they were a group A student in person on Monday, they would come into school for periods 1 and 2, and then go home and be remote for periods 3, 4. That's current. So if they decided to do in person all day, they would come in for periods 1 and 2. They would have lunch from 11:15 to 12:35. And then they would be in school for periods 3 and 4 until the end of the day. And then the next day, the blue days, again, they would normally be in just for periods 5 and 6 in the morning, remote for 7 and 8. They would instead, again, come for period 5 at the beginning of the day and through lunch. And then they would have periods 7 and 8 in school.
And the same would be true on Thursday and Friday.
Yeah, correct. Yes.
Okay. And so the teachers would still be teaching in multiple modalities. So they would still be teaching some students in front of them and some students at home in remote. And so we have the opportunity to build on the existing schedule that we have right now, the length of the periods. One of the challenges in the middle of the day, and it's a logistics challenge. One of the challenges during the day, once we reach out to the parents initially, and then we reach out to them a second time to make a commitment, will be to determine how many students would select that all-day option, and then what do we need to do at lunchtime. So, we've got office hours and lunchtime built into that middle part of the day. We still need that middle part of the day because we would be moving students in and out and to the building in the hybrid half day. So we'd have to determine how many students we have, breaking them into lunch spaces right now, at least of 50 or less in spaces moving forward. And so that would be a logistics issue that we, would need to work through. I asked Tom and John a week or so ago just to kind of start thinking in depth with their teams about what the possibilities are, but we'd have to have an idea on what the numbers are. Now, normally during the year, we allow seniors to do out lunch, and what we've done this year, what we would do is allow any of the students to do out lunch. So part of what we do when we do initial surveying, just to get a handle on that, would be to ask people, is your student going to stay for lunch or is your student going to leave for lunch? If you're around Libertyville High School and you're in walking distance, perhaps you're going to go home for lunch. We would allow students out lunch to do out lunch, and students that can drive to school would be able to leave and then come back for their afternoon periods moving forward. But once we're able to determine, roughly the number of students that we're dealing with, then we can work, we can really game out the logistics, kind of on a real-time level. And I appreciate the work that Tom and his logistics team, operations team has done, and John and his operations team have done just to think about this. So that's, that would be something that we would have to work through. So if you go all the way back to July, and Kevin will remember this, conversation that he and I had as Kevin is the F&F chair, and then we had at the board. And if we would need to, for example, at Libertyville, provide some additional outside space, then there's always the possibility of renting or leasing, large tenting, think of a wedding tent, if we need additional space. But at this point, we'd be able to take a large facility and, divide it. But a lot of that will be dependent on the number of students who actually come in to the building. Again, that would be a logistical hurdle that we would have to work through if we're going to move, if we're going to move that direction. Dan and I have talked a little bit about transportation. And if we have more students staying for a whole day, we would still need to run the routes that we're running for both schedules, but we may well have some routes that have very limited ridership once we provide those, and we might be able to work at some additional route consolidation to be able to get students in on the half day, morning and afternoon, and then all day moving forward. Again, that's a logistic thing that is manageable and something that we would need to work through. So, in consideration, what we would do is, depending on how our discussion ends up tonight, what we would do is the next couple of days, we do a first survey of parents and students. We'd ask them what option they're currently in anonymously, because right now we're just looking for numbers. And then whether or not they believe their student would stay in school and eat lunch, and if they choose the all-day option. So they would tell us, I'm gonna stay in remote, I'm happy with that. I'm gonna stay in half-day hybrid, I'm happy with that. Or I'd like to move to an all-day option, and my student will eat lunch at school, or my student won't eat lunch at school. And that will give us, basic information that we need to do some logistics that we've talked about tonight. And then we need to work on procedures and logistics, including social distancing and contact tracing. Now, it's really important, if we end up doing the an all-day option, parents, and we will make it clear to parents, but we also want the board to know what you already know, and that is, if parents are sending their students back, that we will do 6-foot distancing or the best we can, because that's the only way we can put larger numbers of students into the building. They'll have to be comfortable with that. And the other thing that we all have to understand is, regardless of whether schools do 6 foot, the best they can, the health department for contact tracing, for quarantining and contact tracing, they're using 6 feet. Okay. So if we have a staff member or a student right now who, let's say, comes into school with test positive on Binax now, we might only have to contact trace with, 4 or 5 people. If they're here all day, okay, and we're less than 6 foot social distancing, then that number of people that are going to be contact traced and potentially quarantined are going to be higher. And we're just going to need to accept that as a cost of, opening up, a bit more. And then in terms of a starting date, what we've talked about, and I think, what we feel, I think, fairly strongly about is when we come back from spring break, we would continue what we're doing now, so remote, hybrid, half day. And we would want a delay until at least April 5th, Monday, April 5th, which is a week after spring break, just to give us a chance to, get ready, but also to give us a buffer between spring break and potential travel people will do, and starting to bring larger numbers of students into the building. And I think as I talk to my colleagues, they're all looking at, similar dates, the 5th through the 12th. Most of the schools in our area have a similar a break. So that would give us a 1 week buffer along with our testing and moving forward before we brought a larger number of students into the building at this time. So that's what it would look like in practice. And the transition to that would be the preparation that we've talked about right now. For teachers, if you remember the schedule Bryant walked through, the teachers, if they have a first and second period class, are teaching first and second right now. And if they have a third and fourth period class in the afternoon, they're teaching those classes right now. So there may be students and should be students in all of those classes right now in the half day. There'll just be potentially more students in those classes here, some students in the half day hybrid and some students in remote learning. So again, I think the configuration or the confluence of a number of factors just bring us to the point that we can actually have this conversation. You know, vaccinations weren't on the radar screen. In reality, had not started when we made the decision, you know, to go January 19th with half day hybrid. And then our testing is 6 or 7 weeks along now. And I think, you know, we feel pretty good about that testing and what, you know, our internal dynamics look like. Now, it is true, I think in one of the comments tonight, somebody mentioned, you know, travel over spring break, and, you know, we're going to ask people to be smart, you know, over spring break. And after we came through the winter holiday where we have, you know, Christmas and New Year's, typical times for lots of people to travel and families to get together, we did not have a huge spike. And pretty shortly after that, we started the decline that we're seeing now. So, we would ask people to be smart when they return from vacation. If they're, you know, experience any symptoms, that they don't send their kids to school, and that they get their kids tested, but they don't send them to school. To do that, we can certainly work with Scott Marcotte's group. If somebody needs a place to go get tested, we can work with Dr. Marcotte's group, who's doing our testing, to have somebody tested offsite, not come into the building when they're not feeling well, moving forward. And you know, that would allow us in. I think the last thing I would mention, because we don't know what numbers look like, it's possible at both of the campuses, it's more likely probably at Libertyville, that, you know, we're going to need to take a look at the overall numbers of people who want to opt into, you know, an all-day option, because there is a capacity limit at some point, which we wouldn't be able to social distance people probably even 3 feet. And so, you know, we need to take a look at those numbers when they come in. And once we do, I think we'll have a better handle. And of course, we'll talk to the board about that. If we do the surveying later this week, get that information back by Sunday or, you know, sometime Monday, we'll be able to share that with you at committee meetings on Monday, or if we're going to have a special board meeting on Tuesday or Wednesday next week to follow up on this, you know, a bit more. So those are the things that, you know, we've, you know, continued to talk about looking at this. And Pat and I have had, I think Pat mentioned that, you know, we're at least once a day, most days, twice a day, among the many things that we talk about. You know, this is certainly one of the things that we've continued to talk about. You know, we told the public from the beginning, we're going to continue to look at where we're at, where we stand against, you know, kind of state guidance and trending in terms of what we're doing to look at possibilities of, you know, giving kids the option to come back to school. But again, in this scenario, anybody that has a choice that they love right now. So if you love remote, you stay in remote. You love a hybrid half day, and you're very comfortable with your child being in here a half day, you're good to go. This would only allow, you know, folks that want an in-person all-day option to have that option. So, Brian, Rita, Dan, Tom, John, anything I missed along the way before we open it up and hear from the board and take some questions? I think that's a no, and that would be the first time that I probably ever hit all the points. So stop laughing, Casey. I see that. So Pat, I'll just throw it back to you and the board, and we're happy to talk to you and answer any questions that you might have or comments you want to make. Pat, you're muted.
Hey, you're muted.
Anybody want to go first?
I will.
Okay.
I think we all know there's a growing body of evidence out there that, kids are being negatively impacted by the prolonged lack of social interaction. And I think you guys have done an amazing job putting together a plan that will meet practically anybody's needs out there. I am sure there were a lot of gymnastics around this, trying to put this together so that it meets the community's needs. And I am fully in support of starting with a full day option on April 5th. I do like that we've accounted for spring break and potential travel, keeping community safety in mind. But I'll reiterate it again, I'm in full support of the plan. Anybody else?
I have kind of a side question. It having to do with spring break. Right now, the city of Chicago has restrictions, but not the state about if you travel, where you travel, and what's required when you get back. But it does say that anyone who travels internationally who comes back to the U.S. are required to present a negative PCR test no older than 72 hours, which I'm just thinking if people go to the Caribbean or Mexico or if in fact, I'm just curious about that. And if the state changes and says we need to, anyone who travels out, just wherever you go over spring break would need to follow certain guidelines. Would we then adhere to those?
Well, I think the answer is we'd love to adhere to those, Karen. The reality is people have no obligation to tell us that they've traveled, right? I mean, it's an honor system. So if you come back internationally, you should follow the guidance. But we know, and I'm being just, as the kids would say, real here. We know even from contact tracing that there are parents who won't talk to us and will hang up the phone on us and the health department. So that it has to be on the honor system, and families have to use good judgment. Now that doesn't cloud all of the people who worked with us on contact tracing, right? So what I'm talking about are the exceptions to that. And so being able to track that, we don't have subpoena ability. We don't have, we're not tracking where people are going. It's literally all in the honor system, as it was over the winter holiday when people might have grouped with their families or they may have traveled places then. So we will ask people to be responsible, to follow those guidelines, and then also to be honest with us if their children are experiencing circumstances, not to send them to school, but to contact us, and we'll help work with them to facilitate testing for them if we need to do that. So,
and to follow up on that, the CDC guidance on international travel says that they need to get tested, no more than 3 days before their flight departs from. If they're out of the country, they have to get a test in that country before they get on, the plane. And they have to have proof of that, in order to fly back to the U.S. And then again, the recommendation from the CDC is that if you are returning, from international travel, that you should test again 5 to 7 days after you return. That's a recommendation. But, if somebody goes out of the country, they do need that negative test just to get back on the plane coming back in.
So we have that assurance. I just personally went to Hawaii and back, and Hawaii would not let me in without a negative test. And they tested me again at the airport when I arrived. So it was very strict.
Excellent.
And that would, nobody has a choice on that. You just can't, if somebody travels internationally, it sounds like they can't get back into the United States without a test. So that's I'm just curious about, if the state of Illinois it's just interesting. There's certain ways to control it on a national level.
Karen, to your example, if the state of Illinois did something similar, So when you return, you have to have a test
Mhm.
within so many hours, or they test you when you get back, right?
Yeah.
When you come back from Texas or Florida, California, wherever you may go, coming back. And that would be interesting. And for us, it would be very helpful, right?
And it's only if you're flying, obviously,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
they could enforce it. But yeah, well,
Right.
there's that. I mean, we know that if people have traveled internationally and presumably they would have flown, that they will have to provide that test before they get back and let back into the country.
Great point.
Okay, anybody else? Must be more
On
com-
average,
Yep.
how many, and this is probably more for Tom because you have a greater number of people that are in the building. How many kids do you have in a class generally right now?
You know what? I'm sorry, Don. I didn't research that in advance, but I would say on average, less than 10 is
Okay.
a more, I would say between 5 and 10. There are a couple classes that have a higher number than that. We have some classes where we're seeing 14, 15 students if everybody shows up on, as they're scheduled to. Those classes are not the majority, but we do have a significant number of those. I would say probably between 10 and 20 classes that have around 14 to 15 or 16 students. And the average, without doing the research, is between 5 to 10.
So when we return, it's possible that you could have some classes that 3 feet would be about the best you could do around any one student in any direction.
It's
That is,
yeah, it's
that's
not
a
out of the realm
possibility.
of it's not out of the realm of possibility, Don. We'll have to see.
So
What we don't know right now is Tom's about 65% of the students in right now on a hybrid half day. So down from probably their high of, I don't know, Tom, 73 or 74 probably was your peak at some point. So they're running about 65%. So what percentage of that 65% will choose an all-day option? And we're gonna have to survey to see what those numbers are.
And I think we're actually even a little higher now, Dr. Lee, after the February 22nd kind of opt back in.
Mhm.
We might be back closer to 70% of our students are attending either in the morning or afternoon in cohort A and B. And we have approximately 80 students right now, 60 to 80. I didn't double check the numbers, forgive me on that. We have between 60 and 80 right now who are currently Group D and are attending all day. So then, as Dr. Lee said, we would be adding more students to that mix. We would be looking at the numbers and how we would absorb them and where those students would be and how that would affect class sizes.
one of my big concerns going forward is the number of people who have said that they're, or I should say said, they just haven't done the testing. So we've paid for testing for all of those people who are in the building, yet we still have a significant portion of people who aren't testing, which means that those people will be in the mix when they're in the building with twice as many students in the class. I'm not saying it's an insurmountable concern, but it's definitely a concern. And that's more of a community concern because the closer those kids are, if they're not testing, we're not catching them in the net, then that increases the chance that they're going to bring that back to their homes if there's a transmission that occurs in a class.
Yeah. Well, that's right, Don. I mean, to that point, a couple things. I mean, one, I think it's true. Obviously, I think it's true that schools are not really significant community spreaders of the virus, but a lot of that, I believe, is because the mitigations have been so effective. All right. So we run the risk as we relax this that could change. To your point, I mean, the reason why I think we're in good shape is I think if you look at our school population positivity rate, it's probably on the order of maybe even less than 0.2%. All right. Because we're finding what I would call the occasional case weekly kind of thing, we're doing over 1,000 tests a week. So even if we had 2 cases a week at 1,000 tests, it's 0.2%. I think we're probably a little below that number. So I think when you think about our building and say there's over 1,000 people in there, the vast majority of people aren't near anybody that is likely to be exposed. So I think that's all really good news. I wish in those cases where we did have classrooms that are a little more crowded that we could go back to those people and, ask again, is there any way that we could enroll those people in our testing program? Because I'm still perplexed why there remains a significant resistance to doing that. It's honestly not helping the community. It's not helping our school. And so again, I would just appeal to the community. People are asking what they can do to help. I think the number one thing they can do is actually help us by being tested. Number two, it's practicing the mitigations, not only in school, but when you're out of school. I mean, because the one thing we also know that's a fact is kids aren't catching it at school, but they are catching it when they're not practicing the mitigations when they're out of school. And they are catching it because those are the kids that we're finding when we test them in school. All right. So, I mean, I think this is really a great opportunity for everybody to double down and pitch in, because the last thing in the world we want to do is open up and close down and open up and close down. But I feel really confident with our numbers where they are, that, even with some inability to social distance in all places, even though we absolutely need to and will wherever we can, I really feel confident that we can do this and do this safely.
And then I have one more question for Mark.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Don.
You turned on just at the right time there, Mark. I thought I was going to catch you blindsided there. We spent some money to have our HVAC systems looked at, upgraded, tweaked. We did airflow monitoring throughout the building. Could you just speak to how we have improved airflow in the building and what the turnover in a typical classroom is right now?
Sure. So right now we have our mechanical system, all HVACs set in what you call reverse economizing. So we are, when the temperature fluctuates outside, the dampers fluctuate. So when it got real cold outside, we still kept 10% coming in. So we're averaging 30% or better, with, like I said, temperature fluctuates with the percentage of outside air coming into each room. Each air handling unit is designed to go a range between 4 and 6 changeovers per hour per room. So we're averaging, most of our units run around 5. We've upgraded our filters wherever we could that could handle MERV 13. So we've put the MERV 13 filters in the equipment that can handle it. And that other equipment, we've gone to MERV 8 filters. So we are doing that. When the weather changes here, we'll be able to change our programming over to, if we choose to do that, where we can do midday and evening purges. So what we've done is, normally our system would run about 16 hours a day and then go into unoccupied. We've increased that to 20 hours a day. So basically from midnight to 4 a.m., the system goes into unoccupied, and your thermostats, you have settings, where temperature can go lower in the room, say in the wintertime, down to 65, 60 degrees. Then at 4 a.m. starts back up, the dampers open up accordingly, and you bring your room temperature back up to whatever the room is set at. So we are maximizing the airflow with the capabilities of our equipment that we have, following the CDC guidelines at this point right now.
So reverse economizing, that essentially just says we're not going to run it economy mode. We're going to spend money to heat extra outside air so that we can have more fresh air in the building all the time.
Correct. Yes.
Thank you.
I also just have to say, once again, Dr. Lee was correct. We are running at, I just checked our numbers, we're at 66% in the hybrid, not in the 70% that I thought we had climbed back up towards. So, Dr. Lee, I should have never doubted you in the first place. I have learned that time and time again, but once again, for the record, you had that number correct. 66% hybrid, 34% remote is our current number.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, so along those lines, Tom, if all 66% decide they want to go full day and nobody goes half day, can we accommodate that, or is that where we're going to have to take some judgment?
Well, yeah, so that would be the challenge there would be to accommodate it with the social distancing, because that's where you would get classrooms where you would not be able, you would have full classrooms essentially in that situation where space between students would be, probably a foot to 2 feet when they're in desks. So that would be the discussion the board would have to understand and have. And we as a school would have to take, there's just impossible for me to set every student who wants to come back and redo schedules so that there's complete balance across the, reassigning them different classes means they would have to have new teachers, for example, or that they would have to have different times during the day where they,
yeah, none of us want to, none of us want to see that.
I'd say, Pat, that's why I said we're going to have to take a look at the numbers. And then, we'd have to reserve the right to do some capping if we needed to do that. And then we can talk about what that would look like if we have to do that. But that would be part of our contingency planning. So, I mean, for example, certainly, I think I can speak for Tom and John here. If we had to do that, first priority would be seniors, getting seniors back in the building, right? And then developing some power, some order of priority, after that. But let's cross that bridge when we see what those numbers look like.
Okay.
The plan right now is to do a survey this week, and
Yes.
you would have data back to us by our PNP and FNF committee meetings.
Sure. That's
And
the
then-
plan done. And it would be initial, like we're not looking for sign and blood commitment. We're just trying to get an idea, right? Rough idea. And then once we see what we've got, then we can do some, do some additional gaming out, if you will, in terms of that as we move forward.
Okay. And then I want to just step back and ask a question, and mostly for the public to hear where we're at here. This is really our first chance since we started the hybrid to kind of check in and see how it's going. Can anybody give us a sense of how we're doing academically in terms of progressing through the curriculum at this point? I know we haven't really had that conversation, but does anybody have any feedback on that?
Tom, John, Rita, dive in, guys and lady.
I have a big picture in general. I mean, what are we hearing from teachers in particular?
John, go ahead.
I'll take a stab at it. Look, at the beginning of the year, we told teachers to take their curriculum and focus on what was essential to the course, right? And it didn't mean that they trimmed out important information. It didn't mean that they watered down the course, but they said, all right, what are the essential components of the course? And they've been working hard to get those essential components in. But I will say, as I talk to teachers, I even had a conversation with one of our AP teachers today who said, look, even that considered, I still am behind. I still feel behind. And I think that's an AP course in which it was almost impossible to trim anything out in the sense that everything is essential according to the College Board. But when you talk to teachers who aren't teaching AP courses, curricula that's already decided, they still are feeling like it's a rush. It's trying to get all of that material in, and part of that is just the disruption of the schedule, whether it's trying to fit 2 days into one block schedule. Teachers are used to that, and that seems like easy math, but it doesn't always work that way. The Wednesdays are great for teachers to be able to have that third contact with their students, but they've had to figure out how to blend that into it. So I think teachers are feeling under the gun, but they're working hard to get it all in. And just like last semester, Pat, to your question about achievement, just like last semester, we are seeing more significant numbers of kids even after one progress that are struggling with D's and F's more than have been in prior years. So we're starting those initiatives that we implemented towards the end of first semester, earlier in this semester. But in general, they're working hard and trying to do the best they can.
Thanks, Tom.
Tom?
Yeah, I think John represented what I know well. I think a lot of teachers, the only thing I would add is the teachers, of the courses that have are non-AP, for example, have made those really good decisions about what is the essential content that will help kids advance in the curriculum for the next year. And that's where they're putting their intensive focus on, so that kids are getting what they need in order to take that next step in their curriculum progression.
Rita, how about you? Anything to add? Okay. So, and I would just, I'll just close the question out, or the answers to the question by that's John's response and Tom's response, and the reality of the pandemic and the impact on schedule is very common to other high performing districts that I network with and that John and Tom network with, mostly them through their conference, me through both conferences, but a little bit or wider net. And those are similar at all schools that, are doing a remote or a hybrid scenario.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anybody else want to say anything? Kevin, Jim? Let's see.
Can I just ask one more? Oh,
sure. Yeah, go
Can I
ahead.
just ask one more question?
Sure.
I want to make sure I'm clear on lunch. If students go all day and they are going to stay in the building, will that be a situation where they are socially distanced, since they won't be, and will they be asked to wear their mask as soon as they're done eating?
Sure.
So I'm picturing kids will be sitting alone with 6 feet before the next child, no kid right across from them. If they're at is that what it's going to look like? Because if we can't socially distance in the classrooms, it seems like lunch would be an important time to make sure.
Yes, if they stay for lunch, it would be a yes to both your questions, Karen.
Thank you.
Yeah, we would distance them. And if we need to procure additional space, via tents or those kinds of things, we'll get that to provide that space. John, just the nature of the beast in the two buildings. If you think about Libertyville High School, when it was built, it's been built on several times in different decades. So the main part of Libertyville High School was built like all buildings in the 50s. Okay, it has smaller classrooms, it's got different sized classrooms, the hallways are very narrow. And remember, when Libertyville was built, it didn't have 2,000 students back then, right? And so as it's been added on to, if you've been around schools, you can actually walk through the building and almost, I can tell what decade the building was built in. Vernon Hills, on the other hand, is a more modern, facility, meaning that, the hallways are much wider. The ceilings are very high. The classrooms are more of a standard than they are at Libertyville, and they're generally, more square footage. So, it's a tighter issue, and it's more of an issue, at Libertyville. And John's probably got a little bit more flexibility depending on the facilities that we use for even lunch. But, we'll have to determine again how many students are going to stay and how many students are going to, not stay. And then, try to do our planning from there.
Okay.
I'll just
Yep.
add a couple of quick comments. One is it's good. We're giving options. Those that want to stay remote can stay remote. Those that want to come in hybrid certainly have that option. Those that want to stay all day will have that option. So that's a good thing. My only concern would be opening up the full day option may actually reduce the number of hybrid students, because if a student's, hey, I'm okay being hybrid if only so many kids are in my classroom in the morning and the rest of them are coming in the afternoon. But now if a certain percentage of those will be all day and I'm going to feel crowded in the room, I may as well just stay home. So I think there's a little bit of risk there that our numbers will actually go down, which may help us from a social distancing perspective, but it won't help us from the standpoint of trying to get students back in the building.
Well, I think, Jim, that's possible for sure. And I think the other thing is, if a parent and a student agreed that, they still wanted the half-day option, they're still only in a more crowded building for half a day, right? They're not there all day. So we're not suggesting or recommending that we remove that option altogether, which would force that person that says, okay, I'm still okay being in a half a day, but I'm not really comfortable being all day, but you have to go all day, right? So I think, we're going to see what the numbers look like, I think, once we get the surveying, but people will still have that option.
Yeah, I think I just want to kudos to Mark for getting the buildings ready. Kudos to Prentice and for getting the teachers in line for vaccines. I mean, if not now, when? So everybody knows my position. I don't need to continue down the path but I'm anxiously looking forward to the motion next week and just to kind of see where everybody stands. But again, and most importantly, also kudos to Pat for the testing, because at the end of the day, the testing has found asymptomatic friends or kids, I'm sorry, some of which have been friends of my kids. It's preserved my daughter's senior basketball year. Thank you. I mean, welcome. That's selfish, but that also, you want to talk about mental and emotional health for a kid? Nothing better. So again, kudos, Pat testing, Mark buildings. And again, something Don asked, and I think Mark didn't point out, as the weather gets nicer, I'm sure we're going to open the windows in the buildings as well, which is going to circulate the air even greater than the 4 to 6, right, Mark? I mean, I don't know how sophisticated the systems are, but I would assume if you open the windows, you're going to get a greater airflow.
You still circulate your changeover inside the room is still the same. You're just bringing in more fresh air.
Okay.
And as it gets warmer, our dampers were open to a higher percentage. So yes, opening windows works great. It all depends on your comfort in the room. So we had teachers that opened the windows when it was 15 degrees out. Right. And if that made them comfortable in the room, that's what they did. So,
but yeah, and again, it was a total team effort to get it going. And I know it was a hard process from July on. But again, thank you to all for even considering doing this. And again, I'm anxious to see the motion and vote next week.
And Kevin, one other thing regarding testing, and I may have not made this point earlier, and that is because we are requiring athletes to be tested. As the spring season comes forward, we have a larger number of athletes than the current winter season, much larger. So for example, football is starting. And, with 100 kids at Libertyville and John, I don't know, it's in the whole program, 60, 70 kids at Vernon Hills. In the whole program, you've got soccer, track and field. You've got some things that are coming that are very large numbers. So that's going to drive our numbers up. We still want to appeal to people. We still, Pat, I'm with you. Having done the testing 6 or 7 times myself, it's a no-brainer. It is so simple. It's so easy. It's so fast. As we heard our student representatives say last week at the board meeting, right? To a person, they said that. So we still want to encourage that, but our numbers are necessarily going to go up because the number of kids that we have involved in athletics, they all have to be tested. And we have the ability to do that because it's an activity that you're not guaranteed to participate in by law versus going to school, which is a property right. So that should help, but we still need to continue to make the appeal.
And Princess, that's for all activities, not just athletics.
Yep.
Let's clarify.
There's some one-off. So if You know, Tom and John can probably pick one out, but if there's 3 or 4 kids and they meet once a month, okay, those kids are not being tested. But band, orchestra, choir, student council, you know, things that would come in larger numbers, yes, they're all being tested.
Yeah.
Let me back up. They're being required to test, you know, whenever they start up.
Prentice, can I ask a quick question piggybacking on the testing?
Sure.
So the week after spring break, the kids will resume their same testing schedule that they've been going through up till this point. So everyone who has been tested will be tested that week before, if we decide that we're going to open up to full day learning as an option on the 5th, the week before will be, okay.
I think, and I'm Brian shaking his head, and he's kind of our testing guru inside. So I was pretty sure the answer was that to yes, but it's nice to have affirmation, Casey, right?
Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify for anyone who's listening that may be wondering if their child's going to be tested before the building were opened further. Okay. Thank you.
And one other comment on testing, the one resident wrote a very thorough and good note there tonight on testing. If we ever felt we needed to, we could pivot to an alternate. We've had conversations with Passport Health, and you know, they've told us if we wanted, for example, to use the U of I test, we could still do that. I don't think right now we see any need to do that. Although I did see yesterday they did finally get their FDA approval, their emergency use approval last night, which was a key reason why we didn't go with them originally. But if we, for whatever reason, felt that our testing wasn't meeting our needs, we would have a number of opportunities to pivot to something else if we felt that was necessary.
And if we felt it was necessary for the fall, we could consider the U of I option now that it's been FDA approved.
That's correct.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, Pat and I spent a lot of time talking about this with his expertise with Dr. Morcott, who would have been happy to do either test for us. And, you know, we just weren't sure when that the U of I test, you know, they thought they were going to get their EUA and, you know, we're 7 weeks into our testing now. So, you know, thank goodness we went with, you know, Binex now, because we've been testing for 7 weeks, and some of those schools that are committed to the U of I test won't be able to start testing and probably until next week, at least, I would guess. So it's all good. Yeah. Pat, just a couple more comments and we'll see if anybody else wants to say anything. So just a couple of reminders again here, not only to the board, because you've heard me talk about this, but also to the audience that would be watching tonight. Again, we don't want to lose sight of the staff in here because sometimes in the emotion of the discussions that we've had over a period of time, people forget that the board is also an employer to almost 500 employees in the district. Okay, so part of what's opened, one of the components that we hit on earlier that's opened this door is staff vaccination. So again, it looks like, you know, around the time that we would come back on April 5th, thereabouts, that anybody who wanted to be vaccinated, who was an educator in Lake County, would have their first and second vaccinations. So we would be in a situation where the educators, the employees of the district, you know, would be well protected as well as, and that's an important point. Second, just to go back to social distancing. So parents that would select the full option within reason, if we had to do capping, of course, we would do that. And we don't know that yet, but social distancing, again, if you would make a selection to bring your student back to school, it would be under the understanding that we will do 6 foot or the best we can. Okay. And people would need to know that going in. And as Bryant has pointed out a number of times to us, talking with us, because he's our interface with Lake County Health Department on quarantining and contact tracing, that the county will still use 6 feet, right? So if we are using a standard that's 6 foot or the best we can do, and it's less than 6 feet, that will necessarily mean that we may be doing more students may be quarantined. You know, it's not going to be 100-fold, but more students will be quarantined because the space around those students is going to be reduced in some places during the building.
Yeah, so let me, kind of touch base on that a little bit more and just give you just kind of some examples. So currently, if you have a student that comes in the building and tests, goes through our Binex Now and tests positive, let's say they're there first and second period. So at the end of second period, they go down and do their Binex Now testing. Our nurses, again, they're the ones doing all the work, really with contact tracing. So they do the second test for the student. And if that comes back positive, they then go and do contact tracing for that student. So that student was here first period and second period. And so you're looking at 2 classrooms. You're working at, what is the layout of the classroom? What was the seating chart? Who is sitting near them? And then anyone within, 6 feet. The other thing you have to look at is you're also going 2 days back. So if that was on a Monday, they're going to also ask questions about where you were, where the student was, and talk to the families about Sunday. If this happened on a Tuesday, they go back to the classes on, Monday and Tuesday. So now jump ahead to an all-day student, and let's say they test positive, Tuesday afternoon. The nurses, again, they're doing all the work there with contact tracing. They're going to go back through the schedule from Tuesday and from Monday. So if that student was in all day, they're in more classes. So now they have to go through more seating charts, more classes. And then if you have more students in the class, anyone that's within that 6 foot will have to quarantine. And the quarantine dates, again, are 10 to 14 days. So we can do the minimum of 10. It may be up to 14 days, again, depending on the situation with the student that goes into quarantine, whether or not they have symptoms. So that's what they, would be looking at. So there's going to be, more contact tracing work, done in the buildings by our nurses. And working with the student, working with the teachers, and working with the families. So
Brian, to say that simply though, in the ideal case where every classroom has every student not closer than 6 feet to any other student, if we find a case, we end up not having to quarantine anybody from a classroom perspective.
Correct, and we've had that, and we've had that a little bit now. Is that we haven't had to.
Right. They might if they're on the football team, but that's a different story. But from a classroom perspective, there would be no need to quarantine any students. In this case, given that it is likely that there will be classrooms where students are, say, 3 feet apart, if a student is positive in a classroom, anybody that is less than 6 feet will have to quarantine. That's just Lake County. That's the Lake County rule.
Yes,
correct.
So again, I say, I kind of look at the testing and say, really, a reason why kids are getting tested is to make sure they know whether or not they're positive so that they don't infect other students. To all those students who are not getting tested, I would almost just argue or ask, out of respect for your fellow student, it would really help a lot if you could also get tested. Because I really don't want to see us having to quarantine a whole lot of people here. I think that would not be good. But again, our positivity rates are very low. I think from a risk perspective, that puts us in a really good place. If we can continue to engage in good mitigations, again, not only when we're at school, but when we're out in the community where we know people are catching the infection, it will allow us to really have a good finish to the year here.
Well, I think ultimately we kind of go back to where we started tonight, and that is, for high schools to open now, next year, the following year, as long as COVID is still around in some fashion or form, they're going to have to flex on the 6 foot social distancing, or you're never going to be able to open with the volume of kids that you have in a high school. 2,000 at Libertyville, 1,700 at Vernon Hills, 4,500 at Stevenson. You go around the horn, the number of kids in a high school and a middle school that mirrors a high school are large. So you're going to have to flex on. And again, I think, with everything we know now and all of the other things that we're doing, when the state says maintain a distance of at least 6 feet when feasible, I think we can look at all of the other things that we're doing, because many of the things that we were able to do here, unfortunately, and I really mean that, unfortunately, 98% of the school districts in the state of Illinois can't do. And so we're in a different place. And we're blessed with what we have here, and we're able to do some things that other communities have. And as a result, we're able to have a conversation like we're having tonight about providing an option for all day that other school districts wouldn't be able to do because they haven't been able to do the other things that we've done.
Hey, Prentice, I think that based on the community rates, based on our testing program, based on the ability to get all of the staff, not just the teachers, but all of the staff potentially vaccinated by April 5th, this makes a ton of sense. And if you'll indulge me for a minute, I do want to give credit to everybody who's been involved from the beginning of the school year. The administration, the teachers, the support staff, building and grounds. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, but Pat for instituting and really spearheading the testing and doing so much work to get our metrics so that we can make evidence-based decisions. Everybody has been working as hard as they can. And I want to thank everybody in the administration, the principals, the staff, the teachers, the support, everybody who has really, under very difficult circumstances, always had in mind the students. And you have my full support moving forward with this.
Okay, so I mean, we're not taking a formal vote, but I'm clearly hearing a consensus to move forward here. So I think at this point, let's get the survey out, let's look at the numbers, and we'll make a final recommendation next week, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, Pat, we'll come back to you with work on this a little bit more and polish it up a bit and make a recommendation to you next week. So here's the question for the board then. So we have committee meetings, PNP and FNF Monday night. Remember, probably prior to our first committee meeting, or I suppose before FNF, the second committee meeting, you're going to do a walking tour of the new facilities, socially distanced, of course. So, we need to allow a little time for that. Then we're going to have our committee meetings. So do you want to have this special meeting that night so we could do it before, in between, after? I think with some of the questions you've asked and your favorable comments tonight, that wouldn't have to be a long meeting. We quickly review everything and where we think we're headed, and you would authorize us to go off, vote yes, and authorize us to go out and work on it. Or do you want to have?
Do you think it might be possible to consider postponing the tour if we're going to add this to the agenda Monday, or do you think we have time for all of it?
It depends on what you think. It seems like we're in a good place right now. I mean, with the board. So, we can probably, I would say, half an hour or less easy, probably work through this. But it's really up to all of you. I mean, you've been waiting a long time to take that tour. I would hate you to have to cancel that, but I think we could do a special meeting. We're not looking at probably being there, 2, 3, 4 hours, I think, based on our conversation tonight. But it's really up to all of you. We'll do whatever you want to do.
Why don't we do the special meeting first, because there probably are going to be people from the public that want to come in, and I'd really like to keep it on schedule.
Okay.
And then why don't we just go with PNP and FNF and do the tour at the end of FNF when we're finished, and we can just kind of end with a tour.
Good idea.
Are we certain we'll have enough? Are we certain we'll have enough data and everything that we need, all the information we need, in less than a week?
Well, Jim, I think all we need now is we need to get an idea on numbers for John and Tom and to work with the teams, and we'll be able to report that out. But there may be some more fine tuning. But remember, we've got between now and, if we need to meet the following week in a special meeting, we can do that just to say, okay, now we've crunched everything out. This is what it looks like. We would have to have some additional conversation with you if we had to cap at some point. So what would that look like? How would we do that? We'd want to talk to you about that. But I think for purposes of Monday night and potential decision making, authorizing us really to move forward, that yes, we're going to do this. Let's work on the logistics. I think we will have what we need on Monday. I mean, I'm looking at Bryant, Rita, Dan, John, and Tom. I don't see any issues with that.
Yeah, I'm just, my only thing is, I think some of the committees we've got some stuff going on Monday in terms of like just business. So just be ready for a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. So that, but toward the end, if we whatever, for whatever reason, don't get through it, we can always say at the end, we're not going to do the tour.
Yeah, that's true. I
Okay.
guess that would
But
be
I definitely think we need to make a decision on the rest of this soon here because people want to know.
Yep, that would be our flex space.
Yeah.
So Pat, I would look around to the team, maybe go around real quick if my folks will unmute, and see if there's anything else, for the good of the order that, again, I might have missed or just stepped over tonight. Bryant, are we good? Rita? Dan? Tom?
Yeah, I would just say it'll be a quick turnaround on that first survey. So we're going to need our community to be ready for that and ready to send it back to us, because obviously we'll be producing it, getting it out tomorrow or Thursday. And to get the results to you by Monday night, we'll need everybody to send it back to us right away. Thank you.
Yeah. And Tom, at a minimum, you're going to probably be able to see the percentage of people currently in hybrid, either staying half day or going full day or going remote. We can certainly work on a percentage basis and make decisions based on that if we need to, I think.
Well, sure. And again, if we got to the point where we would have to do some capping, that becomes, what does that look like in the logistics of doing that, right? Doesn't prevent us from moving forward with an all-day option. It's just how do we do the all-day option, depending on what we see. But once we get some initial numbers, I think that'll give us a good look-see. And I think, as we did last summer, we had a high return rate on the surveys when we initially asked, what option would you pick? I suspect we'll have a high turnout on this survey. We'll get a good return. And what we've learned to do in surveying over the years is we're not going to give, we're going to give people 2 or 3 days to get the information back to us. Mary will do a couple of reminders along the way. And, it'll be a Google survey, so it'll be easy. It'll calculate. We go right to pie charts. And so I think we ought to be good.
Yeah. I think we'll get enough data to make the decision. It won't be the final roll call list of all the people going one way or the other, but it'll be enough to make the decision.
Yep.
One question on the survey, forgive me. Did I hear that the survey was anonymous though? Or did I mishear that?
Yeah, just like we did this summer. Alls we don't want to make people make a commitment right now. So Mary's got a tool that she can use that will only go to one family. It will only allow a return from one family. That's what we really want right now. I don't want to see what Dan Stanley wants to do right now. I just want raw numbers. We'll do a second survey, okay, once we get those initial numbers, and then we'll make people make a commitment.
So Pat, to your point, you won't necessarily know which kids are flipping. Like maybe it depends on how the survey is structured, but
We'll ask the right questions that way because that is important. We need to know what they're in now and what they're going to choose to do next.
And that's the way the survey will be framed. I think I said that earlier, but John's exactly right. That's the way we'll frame it. What are you in now, and what would you choose going forward? Knowing that a few people will change their mind along the way, but we'll get a pretty good sense.
And will you stay for lunch?
And will you stay for lunch with Principal Tom, right? Or Principal John?
Okay.
Can I jump in with a brief ask? I was trying to think of what the unintended consequences are. And I recently had to wear a mask all day, every day, and found that to be disturbing. And I remember, John, you were telling us about the basketball player that ran out of the gym, peeled his mask off and squeezed it out. Like our kids are going to suffer some mask fatigue. Right now, teachers in the building, Tom, you're included, you're sitting right there in your office. While you're in your office, you can take your mask off, but the kids are not going to be in a position where they're going to have an opportunity to do that easily. They can always go outside, but I would wonder if we don't think about getting some tents up anyway. When it's raining in April and our kids need to get a break and go outside for a minute, they're not going to have a place to do that if it's raining like crazy. So if I'm not going overboard with this, like too much detail right now, but could we think about maybe providing some outside space that allows the kids to get a break during the day?
Yeah, it might not be tensed on, but I mean, that
Something.
could be part of it. John, I see Tom nodding his head. John, can we work?
Yeah, I mean, the question will still be though, right now our athletes are outside and they have to mask up the whole time too. So while they're on campus, we've been asking students to mask up. So I don't know that just pushing them out in my courtyard, I'm going to say, and take off your masks as well.
Right. Well, is there a place where that can happen?
Yeah,
Like,
I understand.
Safely, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's a logistics question, and we can factor that into the thinking. Work with Tom and John and their teams on that.
Sure.
Okay, Pat, I think that's it from us.
Okay. I guess if there are no other questions, we can adjourn, right? Do we need a motion to adjourn there?
Oh, you probably, just as practice,
All right.
you probably should.
So is there a motion to adjourn?
So
move to
moved.
adjourn.
Who's second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Not, roll call, please.
Carmichael,
Aye.
Grudy,
Aye.
Hessel,
Aye.
Huber,
Aye.
Lundstedt,
Aye.
Rooney,
Aye.
Batson.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thanks, everybody. Good night. And see you
Thank
on
you.
see you on Monday.